Thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to give this talk today is because I think camellias are a plant that a lot of people have tried in this area, and some people have definitely failed with, and I have failed with some too. And I think I finally found some of the solutions to this, so I wanted to share them with everyone. So let's get moving here. And I have a quick look at cooperative extension resources here at the University of Delaware. It'll illustrate what it is. These are the numbers you would call if you want to get on the mailing list for future programs. If you're not already on it, I would call the general information number. We also have our website there that you can go explore, and you can find Master Gardening on there if you're looking for that. So, okay, so let's get started today. What are we going to cover? We're going to cover species of camellias, not all 100 of them, but just the 3 or 4 that are growable around here. And we're also going to talk about the development of hardy camellias, since they are typically a southern plant, and we're lucky to have them here at all. We have some hardier varieties, so we'll go over that. And I'm going to talk about Camellia cultivars for Delaware and the adjacent states, ones that I've found that have worked here, and what to look for when you're shopping to find the correct cultivar that will grow here. Then I'm going to talk about growing camellias in general, the 3 big factors for success in our area, and some other cultural practices like planting, fertilizing, diseases, pests, and winter protection. And then I'm going to just give you a list of some sources for camellias locally and also by mail, and then we'll have questions. If we have time at the end, I have a bonus section on some camellia relatives that are native to North America you might be interested in, especially if you like a native garden. And then I have a second bonus section, the not so hardy gardenias, which won't be a very long talk. So neither of these are very many slides, but if we want to do them, I'll ask you right after we finish up with our questions. So, and before I begin, I just wanted to mention that I'll be talking about hardiness zones, and under what I consider the current or most correct USD hardiness zone map, USDA plant hardiness zone map, all of Delaware is in zone 7, and there is a section of 7B along the coast. 7B is slightly warmer. The rest of the state is 7A. And the criteria for this is based on the coldest temperature of the year, the single coldest temperature of the year. For zone 7A, it is 0 to +5, which I think most of us will agree the lowest temperature for the year in Delaware usually is between 0 and +5. And then down along the coast there, it's a little warmer. It's between +5 and +10 degrees. So we'll talk more about the zones and how they're calculated later, but I just wanted to mention, I'm considering all of Delaware to be zone 7, most of it's 7A, some of it's, a little bit of it's 7B. C. And if zone 6B starts in Chester County, Pennsylvania now, just above, a few miles above the Delaware border on the current maps. And remember, there are the A and B zones. The A zone is a little colder and the B zone is a little warmer. So let's get started. So there are over 100 species of camellias native to Eastern Asia. There's about 6 species commonly grown in the US, and even fewer are grown here. They're very popular plants in the southeastern US because coming from Eastern Asia, they are used to very hot summers and mild winters, but winters where we sometimes see some significant cold. So they fit in very well with the southeastern US. Most of the cultivars you'll find if you buy a camellia book are not fully hardy in zone 7A. They might work out in 7B along the coast. So we don't have a lot of really large old surviving camellias here like you'd see in Atlanta or somewhere where the camellias are 20 feet high and 20 feet wide and take up a whole front yard. We just don't see a lot of those like that here, though we may in the future. But a lot of hardier cultivars have been developed and identified for our region, and including northern Delaware and the Philadelphia region, not just southern Delaware. So let's look at some of the camellia species. We have Camellia japonica, and just so you're aware, people tend to use the Latin name when they talk about camellias. I guess technically this means Japanese camellia. This is one of the main ornamental species. It blooms in late winter to mid-spring. So japonicas are just starting now, depending on the variety. They're native to Japan, Taiwan, China, and South Korea. It's a large upright shrub, even to a small tree. It has big glossy leaves, and there are many cultivars hardy into zone 7B and 8A, and a few are hardy into 7A and even 6B. And those are the ones we're going to pay attention to. And there are some that bloom quite late, and they work pretty well here because the buds stay nice and tight until April, so they don't get frosted out. So that's one option, is to go for a late bloomer of the Camellia japonica type, and I'll be talking about that. So here's a look at some of them. The two on the right are in my property right here in North Wilmington, so they can grow here. The one on the left is in a botanical garden in Norfolk. So they can either have a rounded shape or a tall upright shape. The one in the middle picture there is already at my roof line, so I'm going to have to do some major chopping this year. So just to remember, with a japonica, you really can't plant that under a window. It's not going to work there. And again, they bloom in late winter to mid-spring, and red, pink, or white are your colors, basically. There is supposedly a purple one or two out there. They're not that purple. I think they enhance the pictures a little bit online, but it's slightly purple. And again, there are a few cultivars of this species hardy in Delaware, especially including northern Delaware, which I'll talk about. So these are the ones that typically have the really big flowers and big shiny leaves. I have one with flowers that probably close to 6 inches across. So it's big flowers, big shiny leaves. And here's another species for us. This is the other most common species, the Sasanqua. Camellia Sasanqua blooms in mid to late fall. So usually they're done by the end of the year. They are finished. They are native to China and Japan. And they can be either upright or low growing, and they tend to have smaller leaves and smaller flowers. Many cultivars are only hardy to zone 7B and 8A. I know this having lost a few, but a few are hardy into zone 7A, and maybe 6B. We're not sure about that. And sometimes you'll see another species, Camellia Himalayas, which is very similar to Sasanqua. It blooms in the fall, and it's often grouped with them. So here's what Sasanquas look like. The flowers on the left, they look superficially like the japonica, but those flowers are smaller. They're going to be, maybe half the size or even a little more than half, but they're not that big. The leaves are smaller too. And you can see one over on the right that's kind of sprawly. That one is not as growing as tall, but it's getting wide. There are some you can even use as a low hedge under your window. But I would be aware of that. You want to read the label carefully and look them up and see how tall they get. But these again bloom mid-fall to early winter. Again, red, pink, white. And there's only a few that are going to be fully hardy in northern Delaware. You might have more luck with them in the southern part of the state. Now, here's one we run into every now and then. This is Camellia Sinensis, which in Latin, Sinensis means China or Chinese. This is the plant that tea comes from. So this is your drinkable tea. This is often sort of sold as a curiosity. It's not that ornamental, but it can be an attractive plant. It's native to India, China, and Southeast Asia. There is actually a small tea industry in South Carolina, so we do grow some tea here in the United States. There are many cultivars, but we only know a few in the US because we really don't grow a lot of tea here. It's marginally hardy in most of Delaware. You might have better luck with it along the coast there in 7B. If you were to look at the leaves, they seem to be thinner. It's not very ornamental, but it's an interesting plant to grow. The flowers are white or pink, but small, and the foliage is less glossy. The leaves are kind of thin. You can kind of guess why it's not as hardy. The leaves just don't look like they would hold up. Well, they're grown in home gardens more as a curiosity. So here is the tea camellia. You can see the white or the pink flowers. If you look at those leaves carefully, you can see they are a little thinner than the typical other two camellias we just talked about. So that may be why they're less hardy. It's an easy plant to grow as a potted plant if you have a cool room to overwinter in. It's not going to like being in a warm house with average heat in it, though. It's going to want to be in a cool place, maybe like an unheated garage or something for the winter, and then take it out in the summer outside. And here's the last species we're going to talk about. This is Camellia Oleifera. It is known as the tea oil camellia. It is from China, and it is grown for its oil, not for its flowers. And the oil is produced in seed pods after flowering, and they look like this, these big balls on the end of the branches. It is hardier than the other camellias by about a zone or more, hardy to zone 6B, even 6A. And this one survived the mid-1970s winters at the National Arboretum, so it was picked to help create the hardier cultivars we're going to talk about. The flowers are not especially attractive or ornamental. There are a couple cultivars, named cultivars, like Luchon Snow is the most well-known one, and it blooms in the fall, October in Delaware, and it can get large. So here is what this one looks like. If you want to see one of these blooming, they do have one at Winterthur in northern Delaware here, Winterthur Estate. It tends to be a sprawly plant, so remember how big it's going to get. And the flowers shatter easily, and that means if there's a good wind or something shakes the branches, you can end up with a lot of petals on the ground, so they don't hold the flowers that well. So it's another plant to grow as a curiosity, but there are better, more attractive camellias to grow around your property if you're looking for something that's really pretty. But it's a very hardy camellia, and it's probably the hardiest. So let's talk about how they developed and identified hardy camellias that could stand cold and grow up here in the mid-Atlantic. Before they did that, the line for camellias was around Washington, D.C., or even a little below that, where you could grow them without any care. There was a gardening group called the Potomac chapter of the Camellia Society, which actually went out of business for a few years after extreme cold spell killed their camellias in the area. Now it's back in business again, but the line was traditionally around Washington, and in Delaware that would be probably southern Delaware and the southernmost New Jersey, places like that, but not up here in Wilmington or the Philly area. So someone named Dr. Ackerman at the National Arboretum did some work on creating hardy camellias. He noticed in the mid-1970s, most of the camellias at the National Arboretum died after 2 bad winters. Out of 956 camellia varieties growing there, only 15 survived. So that really weeded out the weak ones. Amongst the survivors were the tea oil camellias, the Camellia Oleifera that we just talked about. It's not very ornamental, but super hardy. So Dr. Ackerman started crossing these with the less hardy traditional Camellia species. So he crossed the tea oil one with the Japonica cultivars and produced spring blooming hybrids. He crossed the tea oil with the Sasanqua or the Himalayas and created fall blooming hybrids. So in the end, he released over 50 hardy Camellia cultivars. So all these camellias had those hardier genes in them, and they proved to be hardier in our area. He also selected and developed extra hardy non-hybrid Japonica cultivars, usually ones that bloom late in the season in April. And these were suitable because blooming late, again, the bud didn't open up till pretty late, but the plants themselves are extra hardy as well. So here he is, probably at his home or perhaps at the National Arboretum. He wrote those 2 books on either side of them. If you're interested in growing camellias and you want to know more about them from a technical standpoint, either of these books are kind of interesting. Growing camellias in cold climates or beyond the camellia belt. I have both of them. They are kind of technical, but they're interesting to see what trouble they went through to create these for us. I don't know if the books are still in print, but you can definitely find them in a used book search. So he wrote those 2 books, as I just mentioned, and he collaborated with others who produced and identified even more hybrids and hardy types. Clifford Parks was one of them, Margaret Pooler, and Dr. Egolf at the National Arboretum as well. So you'll see some of these people mentioned as the originators of certain hardier camellias. So the new hardy camellias combine the best of the parent species, improved hardiness from the tea oil parent, and they did their best to retain the flower colors and composition of the older cultivars, and they did pretty well. And again, the April series are just extra hardy japonicas, not hybrids. And there are many new cultivars, hardy cultivars available in Delaware. When you go to a nursery here, it's almost hard to find the non-hardy ones. At least that's the case up here in northern Delaware. Southern Delaware, you may have more of the less hardy traditional ones sneaking in. And, you know, as long as you're in the 7B area, they should be no problem. But I do remind people we have had some really cold winters here. Remember the polar vortex winters in around 2013 and 14 and 2014 and 15, where we had below zero temperatures, even in Sussex County, most of Sussex County. You really needed to be right along the ocean to avoid them. So those could be camellia killing temperatures for the less hardy types for sure. And when you're looking for a hardy camellia, they often have names like winter, ice, snow, frost, polar, spring, April. Those are clues that they are tough and handle the cold, or in the case of April, they bloom late. So those are clues, but you should always check the label on the plants before you buy. So here are some of the National Arboretum releases. I had trouble finding lists of these. On the left are ones that Dr. Ackerman created that had scents, which I don't think really went over that well. But on the right are some of the hardy ones he created. Notice those names in them. They have all those frost and winter and snow and ice, and kind of give you the idea they're going to be extra hardy. And all the ones in black are hybrids. So hybrid meaning cross between two species. So let's look at some Camellia cultivars for Delaware. And I'll go over the ones that I have that I've had luck with. I'll talk about ones I've seen elsewhere growing here in Delaware. And I'll talk about ones that I haven't had such good luck with. The one above there is right in my yard in North Wilmington. So this is a good one here. This is my first bloomer of the year. It's starting to bloom right now. This is Spring's Promise. It is rated hardy to 6B, so I'm in 7A. It gives me an extra little half zone there of comfort. This one survived and bloomed after those vortex winters. So it lived right through those bad winters. It killed a lot of other things. It lived, and not only lived, but bloomed. This one blooms very early. They call it Spring's Promise because it's kind of promising spring before there is spring. Now, when you get a warm spell, even around Christmas, sometimes you get a flower or two. February, you get a warm spell, you might get a flower or two. And then you get the bulk of the flowering right now in March. But because of that winter bloom time, it's sometimes the flowers will get zapped with cold. The flowers seem to survive a couple degrees of freezing, but once you get into the 20s, they're going to turn brown. Spring's Promise is sometimes listed as a hybrid, but it seems to be just a straight japonica now, and I research it more. But it's a nice little pink color. These are pictures from my own yard in North Wilmington, so it's been a very good performer for me. The only problem I'm having now is I lost the shade that it used to grow under, and some of the leaves are getting a little browned in the winter because it doesn't like that winter sun. So let's look at the next one. Red Jade. This is one I really like the color of this. I mean, these flowers look like the flowers on top of a cake made with icing, in my opinion. It's a nice, rich red. It blooms early, but it blooms kind of after, but overlaps with the Spring's Promise. So this one's going to bloom later this month into mid-April. It's again rated hardy for 6B. This again survived and bloomed after those vortex winters. And it was developed and sold by Camellia Forest, which is a mail order camellia grower. I mean, they sell a lot of their plants up here in the nurseries too. So if you can't find this, you can order it from their website, which I will supply you with later. And here is my big champ in the backyard. This is Kumasaka. This is the one that has the flowers that are 5 inches plus across. And as you can see on the left picture, it blooms very nicely. Don't have to do much for that either. I mean, it just blooms. This one also survived the the extreme cold. This one blooms in mid to late April, so it's kind of the last bloomer. It's kind of when the weather's kind of warming up, it's not really camellia weather anymore, but this one then blooms nicely. You get a lot of nice flowers. This, you can notice the typical upright growth on this one. This one is about 7 feet tall now. It's starting to get up to my gutters. I'm going to have to get out there and do some chopping. Maybe I'll root some cuttings and give them away. This one's considered somewhat more sun tolerant than some of the others, because most camellias like part shade. But this one is on the northwest corner of my house, so it's somewhat exposed, but it's liking that whatever shade it can get. But it, being extra hardy, it does just fine. Here is Winter Star. This is a fall blooming hybrid. It's one of the ones they crossed the tea oil with the Sasanqua. This is a nice little camellia that is a very good performer. I had this at my old house, and I sort of, this when I first got started with camellias, I didn't know what I was doing. I bought this thing in October or November, and it was blooming in the pot. And you know, one thing I'll tell you for Delaware and north is it's not really a good idea to plant a camellia in the fall, because you want those roots to be well established before the winter. So it's really better to plant them in the spring here. But I planted this in November, and it bloomed, and it didn't skip a beat, no damage at all, did just great. So this one was popular a few years ago. You might have to hunt a little more for it, but it's a nice hardy plant that's not going to give you much trouble. Now here's a new one that I'm seeing a lot of references to. This is Korean Fire. This is a japonica, but it has small flowers. They're just noticeably small. They're just 2 or 3 inches across, but you get a lot of them. It tends to grow up to be a pretty large plant, 10 feet plus, but it's considered perhaps the hardiest Camellia japonica. It survived -12. Suppose you can grow it up to 6A. Well, I hope that's the case. I've seen this mail order, and maybe once or twice I've seen it in a nursery. So this is an extra hardy one. So if you need hardiness, this is one of the ones to go for. Now, here's one I ran into at Winterthur where I work. This is called April Remembered. It is a pink one that blooms in the spring. Winterthur to me is a little colder than where I live, so I was pleased to see this doing so well there. So you're in still zone 7 there, but you're getting closer to 6B, which would, to my mind, starts around Longwood Gardens. But this one does very well there. They have it very well sited, which I'll show you later, which contributes to its well-being. Here are some other hardy camellias. We know about the Luchon Snow one. That's the that's a Oleifera. You can see that at Winterthur if you want to see that. Fire and Ice I've grown. That's a cross that blooms in the spring. Camellia Sasanqua Long Island Pink has been for sale a couple times on the University of Delaware Botanical Garden plant sale. This one was sort of discovered in Long Island, growing up against someone's house, and which is kind of north for camellias, and so it's probably an extra hardy variety. The one in the lower right corner, Yuletide, I've seen that for sale around Christmas time in the nurseries. Blooming, it's really pretty, but that's kind of the worst time to plant one. I'm not positive that's going to do well in zone 7A. I mean, it might, but I don't know if it's extra hardy or not. But it would be better to get one of these and plant it in the spring, if you could find one, than to plant it at Christmas time. If you bought one at Christmas time and you can overwinter it in a garage with good lighting, like cool temperatures but good light, it might be better to wait till spring. And here are 4 more that I discovered at Winterthur. These are all fall blooming ones, which are all near their bookstore and the main store in Winterthur. I think the Henry Francis DuPont House, they call it, or the cottage. So these are all outside there, also growing in a very nice situation with regards to lighting, which I'll talk about more. When you see an X in the Latin name of a plant like this, that indicates it's a hybrid. So just so you know, when you see X, it indicates it's a hybrid. In this case, we're not saying what the two plants are they cross, but you just have to know that means a hybrid. And a few other ones. There are many new hardy camellias out there. It's kind of hard to find the same one. I mean, there's so many out there. But again, look for these names. Remember the April series, extra hardy late bloomers. They bloom in April. But check and read the labels. Pick cultivars rated for your zone or colder. So if you're in zone 7B at the shore, it doesn't hurt to get one that's rated for 7A or 6B even, because you'll be covered when you get an extremely cold winter. You're all set. So up here in Wilmington, I like ones that are rated for 6B because I'm covered in case we get a really bad winter. And as you see, the three that I mentioned before, I've had no problems with. And also take note of the ultimate size on the label. So one other thing I would say about hardy camellias, again, is at least up here in northern Delaware, it's almost hard to find one that isn't an extra hardy type. I don't know if that's the case further south in Delaware, but you can always look these up online. You can, write the name down or look it up on your cell phone, go out to the internet, put the name in and see if you can see a rating on it. Because I think some less hardy ones will slip north. That's how the nursery industry is. So here's some less hardy ones I've tried and managed to kill or almost kill. The little one in the corner there, Camellia Himalayas Shishigashira, which I think in Chinese means lion head. That's a small, low-growing camellia. It's a very nice one for a hedge. I bought these on eBay. They grew very nicely for a few years, but when we had those vortex winters that I keep mentioning, this bit the dust, and this was rated 7B, and I'm in 7A, so they meant it. It was 7B, and I'm at 7A, and I learned my lesson. That one I can't grow unless I probably cover it or something. The same thing happened with the tea plant for me. I just wasn't able to get it through the winter here without covering it, and I didn't cover it. So, I mean, I don't like doing the extra work of protection, so I'm lazy. The Conjuro one in the lower left is a traditional Sasanqua. It was rated for 7A, but it didn't seem to bloom well for me. It seemed like it was just, it didn't know when we were going to have that nice, slow, cool fall and winter that it likes down south. As you know, here in Delaware, sometimes we go from summer temperatures to winter temperatures in about a week. We don't have that long, cool fall and winter that they get down south. So I almost feel like this one got confused. It didn't know when to bloom. Whereas the hybrid, like the Winter Star that we saw before, that one bloomed like perfect. It just knew October, November, time to bloom, it blooms. So I don't know if a regular Sasanqua will work out very well in northern Delaware, but maybe you have better luck with it in southern Delaware. In Camellia japonica Kramer Supreme, this one is rated for 7B, but I managed to keep one alive. It's growing sort of between my Akuba and my bamboo, sort of sheltered. It is growing very well. It's about 7 feet high now. So you can kind of get away with stretching a zone sometime if the plant's really sheltered, and this one really is. So selecting camellia. First, of course, pick a hardy cultivar. Pick one that's rated for your zone. And then decide you want a fall or spring blooming. There are two schools of thought on this in terms of hardiness. The fall bloomers bloom before the winter cold kills the buds. So, I mean, that's one thing to think about. If it blooms before winter, you're not going to lose flower buds. However, if you have a spring blooming bud that opens later after the frigid winter has passed, like the late bloomers I mentioned, the April bloomers, they work pretty well too, because I still had flowers come out even after those bad winters because the buds were nice and tight on mine until we hit warmer weather. So both can work in this area. You have to try what's best for you. But as I said, the less hardy fall bloomers like the non-hybrid Sasanqua seem to get confused as when to bloom. I was waiting for that mild fall, which we didn't really have. And remember, most camellias grow upright. They're not really a good plant to put under windows. You want to plant them on a side of your house where there's no window, or out away from the house. So here are some of the various flower types. In the graphic on the left, you can see the 6 main flower types. So you can look those up online. If I didn't actually supply this picture in your handout because it wouldn't come very nicely in black and white, but you can go online and see what those different flower types mean. And then if you're ordering a plant online, you'll know what you're going to get more or less. So you take those 6 flower types, and then over to the right, you can end up with any of these kinds of flowers, or others. And you can see we're basically pink, white, and red, and very different flowering types. And I would say, if you get your heart stuck on a particular cultivar, keep looking, because there's just about, there's so many hardy ones nowadays. You can probably get the same kind of flower type in a hardy variety as compared to a less hardy type. There's so many varieties, and if you can't find the one you want, just keep looking, and you might find a hardy one out there that will give you the flower type. These do get pollinators in the spring. You'll get bees on them because they open early, and we do have certain bees like bumblebees that get out really early. So they are a pollinator plant, at least the ones that have the stamens that are visible. The ones that are very tightly, the tight petals they're going to have a lot harder time getting in there. So let's talk about growing camellias, what you have to do to grow them. So the 3 big factors for success. One is hardiness. Get sufficient hardiness for Delaware or wherever you live. Select plants rated for zone 7 or 6. Get the right amount of shade versus sun, and I'll talk about that. We haven't talked too much about that yet. And avoid winter sun, especially. Winter sun, by that I mean is low angle sun coming, say in late January, February, March, where you get all the sun, but we have freezing temperatures. This can really hurt them, and I'll explain why later. And remember, there's shade and then there's shade. When I talk about shade, we need a bunch of new words for different kinds of shade, because I'll show you the difference, what kind of shade they like and what kind of shade they don't like. And then lastly is the correct soil conditions. They like moist but well-drained soil, which is, of course, always interesting and sometimes tricky. But we often need to add organic material to lighten the soil, especially if you have clay soil. And this one, I think people tend to not do or not worry about as much. And I think getting the soil right is as important as anything here in Delaware, because I think the wrong soil can be the last straw that can kill a camellia here, where if you just got the soil right, you'd be on your way with a nice, healthy plant. So let's look again at those hardiness zones. This is the Mid-Atlantic region, and this is the map that I prefer. This one was released around 2010. There's ones where they made the zones go up further, the global warming edition, I call it. And there's an older map that had zone 6 even going into northern Delaware, which I think was not accurate either. This map, they took 30 years of data, so it's more accurate. As you can see, all of Delaware is in zone 7. All of the eastern shore of Maryland is zone 7A or B. Southern New Jersey is all zone 7 except for the interior of the Pine Barrens. Southeastern Pennsylvania, as you get close to Philly, you're still in zone 7. And then northern Maryland, still zone 7. So again, remember 6B starts Chester County, I'm guessing around Longwood Gardens, perhaps, or a little further. And the A and B are subzones. Let's talk about the limitations of the zones. The USDA hardiness zones are calculated simply by math. They take the single lowest temperature of the year, the one coldest temperature of the whole year, and they divide that by the number of years. So they collect these for every year. And then if they do them for 30 years, then they add that number, divide it by 30. So for zone 7A, where most of us live in Delaware, that zone says that the coldest temperature, the average coldest temperature for the year is going to be between 0 and +5, which I think most of us can agree with. 7B is going to be between 5 and 10. So plants are rated according to the plant killing temperatures, but the zones do not take into account the duration or frequency of the cold weather, how often it's going to get close to that killing temperature, or just how long it's going to be frozen. And the average winter temperature is not taken into account. So you can imagine a zone 7 in North Carolina is going to be a lot warmer than one in northern New Jersey. So it doesn't take that into account either. And it doesn't take into account the amount of time plant tissues are frozen, which is kind of significant for any broadleaved evergreen plant like a camellia, because those leaves have to live through freezing temperatures. So again, here's Delaware. And again, these temperature ranges represent the single coldest temperature of the year. So we're saying the coast is a little warmer on average, but again, they did have zone 6 temperatures there once a few years ago, and 20, 30 years ago now they might have them again. So you got to think about that. But when you buy a plant for a specific zone, it kind of implies it's supposed to handle those ups and downs, those occasional really bad temperatures. So anyway, I've had no problem with ones that were rated for 6B or 7A, even 7A up here in North Wilmington. So I would say you could certainly try a 7B camellia down in the coast of Delaware and, plant it in a sheltered spot. You probably won't have trouble. So let's talk about the right amount of shade versus sun. This is an important thing for camellias. Anybody who grows camellias down south knows they like some shade. So camellias are woodland plants. They grow and bloom best in sort of openings in the woods, not dark woods, but they want to be in the woods, so at least part of the day they get some shade. So they grow best in places with filtered sunlight, openings in the woods, and part shade really works best for them, not full shade. North side of buildings can work, or the north side of a plant in front of it. Say there's a big holly tree to the south of your camellia. Even that can be enough shielding from the winter sun. But too much shade, you're going to not get as much flowering. You're going to get thinner growth. So you don't want to really shade them out really heavily. And again, winter sun is a killer. Winter sun stresses camellias because it dehydrates the foliage. So when those roots are frozen, they cannot supply adequate moisture to the leaves. The frozen roots and the frozen stem can't get that water or hydration up to the foliage, and you end up with brown leaves. And if it happens enough, the leaves will actually shrivel and die. If it happens just a little, you'll see bronzing on the foliage. You'll see like a little brownish tinge to the plants, or like a olive green when it should be a dark green. You'll see this too on the other plants like azaleas and rhododendrons, but they're hardier and they can survive it better. So in some cases, the whole plant may die, which is something you got to be careful of. Same problem for azaleas, rhododendrons, and many broadleaved evergreens. They have the same issue with winter sun, but again, azaleas and rhododendrons are hardier. But sometime take a look at a rhododendron growing on the south side of a building in the winter. It's going to look probably sort of not very green and healthy. It's going to look more yellowy, like it's sort of struggling. Then find a rhododendron in the shade on the other side of the house, and you'll see a rich green color. That's where it's really happier. But again, they are hardier plants like rhododendrons. When you're dealing with a less hardy broadleaf evergreen like a camellia, the effects can be even worse, and if not fatal. And again, here's my little chart of their shade and then their shade. So an opening in the woods in the upper left. This is great for camellias because this is the Norfolk Botanical Gardens. They have a belt of pine trees to the south of the camellias, so that winter sun is sort of definitely filtered very much. So it's open to the sky above, but that winter sun is being blocked to some degree by pine trees, so they don't get as much sun as they would get if they were out in the middle of an open field. And then over to the right, on the top right, there we have Winither, the azalea woods. Azalea woods is planted under a canopy of tulip trees, which provide a dappled light that the azaleas like, and they will bloom longer if they have a little shade. If it was total dark shade, they wouldn't bloom as well. But it's just dappled shade, filtered shade from overhead. That would work also well with certain pine trees like loblolly pines, let a lot of light in. Then in the lower left, we have one camellia growing on the north side of a house. This works great. North side of a house, you get very little direct sun, but you get plenty of light. So this one's really out in the light. Is that shade? I don't know. Is it? I don't know. We need new words for some of these, but north side of the house is a great place for a camellia. But over in the lower right there, that's real dark, deep shade. That's not going to work. That's too shady. That's going to work for moss or something, maybe ferns, but it's just too dark for a camellia, especially if you want to get flowers. If you plant a camellia there, it's going to struggle to grow and you're going to have fewer blooms on it. So you want this sort of bright shade or filtered shade, or shade on the north side of a building, not this dark, 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 deep shade. Now here is Winither, where I've identified a great spot for camellias. Someone who planted them there knew what they were doing because they planted them all on the north side of buildings. So as you can see, the camellias are out in bright light. They get plenty of light, but they have these buildings to the south of them. So when the winter sun is at its worst, they're not getting roasted by the sun. They're allowed to thaw slowly, not all at once in the morning when the sun hits them. So they do a lot better there. So they're not in dark shade at all. They do get direct overhead sun, and they get even more in the summer than the winter, and that's okay because they're not frozen then. But the low angle sun in the winter is blocked by the buildings, at least some of it. It doesn't all have to be blocked, just some of it, and they do better. Correct soil conditions, again, this is a real critical one, especially the further north you go. When you talk to people down in Georgia, they're going to say, I don't do anything special for the soil. Well, maybe they don't have to, but we do up here, I think. So they grow best in fertile, moist, but well-drained soils with lots of organic matter. They're an acidic-loving plant, and our soils, luckily, are pretty acidic here, so we don't have any issues with that. We don't have to add an additional acid to our soils. They work just great as is. They do not like soggy or wet spots, and they hate poor drainage, and they don't like heavy or clay soils. Heavy or clay soils kind of block their breathing. Their roots can't breathe when clay is really just very fine particles of soil, and it sticks to things and creates, a mucky situation. Camellias hate that. So we need to fix that if you want to have luck with them up here. And frozen heavy clay can really exacerbate the winter sun problem, because then they're like frozen into like this brick of clay. No water is going to be moving in that plant up to the leaves. When the sun hits them, it can't transpire properly, and then you're going to get burnt leaves. So they do best with soil amendments, especially in the northern edge of their range, where you're going to have more of an issue with winter sun and frozen camellias. You got to have the soil better. It really seems to help. So let's look at soils for camellias. Northern Delaware, our soils tend to be too heavy. Now, I don't know how far south in Delaware you have a clay issue. I would imagine far down in Sussex County, you have more of a sandy situation, which might be a different remedy, but still you don't want any soil that's heavy and holds too much moisture, so they're actually soggy. So I suggest lightening our clay soils, and do that by incorporating lots of pine soil conditioner or shredded pine bark mulch. And you want to mix this right in the soil. Optionally add some compost or humus as well, especially those of you in the south where you may have poor soils with a lot of sand. You might want to add some compost or humus in there, topsoil, whatever, to make the soil better. Hardwood mulch is not as good for them, but it's okay in a pinch. Hardwood mulch tends to soak up nutrients, but believe me, the bigger problem is the aeration of the soil, not the nutrients. Our soils here are pretty good in Delaware. I've never seen my camellias act like they didn't have enough nutrients. What they do complain about, though, is heavy clay soil. So even hardwood mulch is better than nothing if you can't get the pine soil mulch, pine bark mulch. It doesn't break down as well for camellias as the problem with the hardwood, but it does break down. Make sure the bed has some drainage. You want to plant them slightly higher than the surrounding ground. And I really think getting the soil right is critical for success here. So here are my soil amendments. Pine soil conditioner over in the left. So there's several brands. I'm just putting bags of it out there so you can see. This is the best stuff for them. It's very fine mulch is really what it is. It's pine bark in very small pieces. Regular pine bark mulch, as long as it's shredded in the middle picture, that's okay, that'll work. And like I said, hardwood mulch will even work. But these are ones you want to mix right into the soil. So you want to put at least 25% or 50% of your hole with this stuff in it, which seems kind of crazy, but this is what makes them happy. It aerates the soil for them, and their roots love to grow in this stuff. Now, if you have a camellia that's happy and you didn't do all this, don't worry about it. Your camellia is happy as is. You don't need to dig it up or anything, but you might start putting this kind of soil conditioner on the soil surface as a mulch. It'll gradually percolate down there over the years and probably make the roots a little happier. But again, if you have a happy camellia, don't do any of this. Don't change the soil on it. But if you have one that's struggling, you might want to dig it up and put more of this kind of stuff in the planting hole. Here's a little graphic I made, which is not the best drawing. Sorry, my throat needs it. When you make a hole for your camellia, if say you had heavy clay, you don't want to make just a little tiny hole like in the upper left where you create sort of a bucket where you have heavy clay soil on all sides and you're sticking your camellia in this hole, maybe with a little bit of that mulch, but not very much. You may create a bucket that fills with water and doesn't drain well. That's no good. It's better to dig a wider area out. If you have to, you can put the root ball on top of a little pedestal of dirt with your improved stuff on either side of it, as in the upper right, or better yet, just dig up a bigger area and you'll have less problems with water sticking around if the bigger the area you dig up. So a large bed is going to work better. And notice how I'm positioning the root ball slightly above the soil level. So again, plant them slightly raised from the surrounding area to ensure good drainage, just an inch or so. Doesn't have to be more than that. They should have a light covering of mulch over the root area as well to ensure soil moisture, but you don't want to go crazy with the mulch, just an inch or two, that's going to be fine. Shredded pine bark mulch or the soil conditioner is best as a soil covering. Again, you could use hardwood mulch if that's all you have, but pine bark mulch is going to break down a little better for the camellias over time and sort of improve the soil and make it acidic the way they want. And if possible, plant your camellias in the spring to give them the whole growing season to establish a good root system before winter. Now, I know down south, they're going to say, oh, we only plant in the fall. But remember, down south, the winter's not as bad and they have really long, hot summers. So in that case, it's better to plant in the fall so they have all winter to grow roots. Up here, though, spring planting is perhaps better. Early spring is good. So right now, it's a good time to look for camellias and get them in the next month. But you probably could get away with fall planting, especially in southern Delaware, but I think spring's a little better. It gives them more time to get a good root system before winter. Because our issue is going to be more winter than summer. So again, here's root ball and mulch placement. You want that root ball slightly high. You want to add about a couple inches of mulch over the root area. You'd never want to mound mulch against the trunks because that can introduce all kinds of pathogens into the trunk. The trunk is not supposed to be buried in mulch. Mulch is really, we're sort of duplicating what nature would have in the woods, which is, leaf material and pieces of sticks and things like that. Mulch from the plant standpoint is what it should have in nature, but not mounded up against the trunk. Those mounds you see these people doing, these landscapers, I think they just got too much mulch and they're too lazy to take it back. Some people are starting to like these mulch mounds and they're really bad for the plants because mulch moist mulch is not supposed to be up against the trunk of plants. It's only supposed to be over the root area. Otherwise, you can introduce all kinds of pathogens into your plant. So don't do the mulch mound. So good, good, and bad. So again, as a surface mulch, you can use any of these here. Any of them are fine. But again, the stuff made from pine bark is a little better for the camellias. Same would hold true for rhododendrons and azaleas. They're very similar in their needs and what makes them happy. They like acidic soil, acidic mulch like this, the best. And azaleas and rhododendrons will also benefit if you dump a lot of this pine soil conditioner into the planting hole as well. You just have to remember to water them enough the first few years. So when you get, if you're going to use mulch either for the surface or into the planting hole, make sure it's not the big nugget type. You want the shredded type like this. Pruning and watering. Normally you don't have to prune these very much. They grow very thick and nicely with no real work. You just may have to shape it a bit and keep it from, growing over your roof line. But get the right species and cultivar for your site. If you really want a low one, there might be one that you could find that fits in your situation. But I think we need to expect they're going to get 5 to 6 feet in time. So not really good for in front of a window. These bloom on wood from the previous year. So the best time to prune them is right after they flower. You don't want to prune them in the fall. You're cutting off your flowers for the next spring. And you need to make sure you water them a bit during dry periods, especially for the first year, because to create that fast draining situation that they like, their roots aren't going to be ready yet to handle the dry period. So you need to make sure they get some water there. Don't drown them. Don't create a puddle, but just give them a decent amount of water, maybe once a week in the hot summer weather, just so they don't get too dry. Don't overwater. Feeding. They grow naturally in acidic soils, and that's what we have here in Delaware, so that's a big help. Don't apply lime right next to or on top of a camellia. It's not going to kill them, but lime will turn their leaves yellow. Too much lime. Lime is the opposite of acid, so lime is alkaline. So it's going to what happens with the camellias and the other broadleaf evergreens is when the soil's too alkaline because of lime, they cannot absorb nutrients. So the foliage gradually gets yellow or sort of spotty because it can't pull the nutrients out of the soil. So even the food you apply won't work as well if the soil is too alkaline. So you want to keep it acidic. Don't put lime near them. Use acidic soil like hollytone, cottonseed meal, things like that. Put a cup of it in the hole at planting time, mix it really well. And you can apply these same fertilizers in the spring. You could even use something like mere acid, but people tend to overdo it with mere acid because it's water-based, It's only going to need 1 or 2 shots of that. I like the slow-release granular fertilizers like hollytone, though, that they'll last the whole season. You might want to push away the mulch, put the fertilizer like hollytone on top of the soil surface, put the mulch back, and then it'll be there and just trickle down the whole season. They don't need a ton of fertilizer. Camellias are amazingly easy once they're in the ground. I barely fertilize mine at all anymore, and you can see what beautiful blooms I have. I just fertilize them in the beginning. Now, if I think of it, I might throw a handful of cottonseed meal over their root area in the spring, but sometimes I just forget and they still bloom. So they're not a real fertilizer hog. And we have enough our soil is fertile enough here, they don't really need a lot of fertilizer. And I recommend not fertilizing in the fall or too late in the growing season. You don't really want to encourage late season growth, which will be more subject to winter damage because it won't be hardened off by the time the cold weather comes. So you want to fertilize in spring, summer, but I don't bother in the fall. Remember, fertilizer is only going to be of use to the plant when it needs it, when it's growing. Otherwise, excess fertilizer just becomes more junk in the groundwater that creates pollution. So you don't want to fertilize when a plant's really dormant. You want to get it when it's going to use that fertilizer. Diseases and pests, they have relatively few diseases and pests. I never have any disease problems on mine at all. I think further south they have a few things, but nothing major. Few leaf diseases. I haven't seen any on mine at all. But avoid problems by choosing the right cultivar for your area, plant in the right kind of part shade, part sun site, and do fix the soil and don't plant in a wet spot. Do those three things, the three things for success, and you won't have a lot of problems with them. They're very easy plants once they're established. And speaking of pests, you know, deer, rabbits, voles, squirrels can do damage to camellias in winter when food is scarce. I think deer will eat anything when they're hungry enough. And the same goes for voles and squirrels. If there's plenty of food, they won't bother camellias. They're not especially delicious, but it can happen. Fencing can help if you have a deer issue. Wrapping the trunk with chicken wire, steel wool, or foil can help with voles and rabbits, which, you know, again, they're only going to be eating your camellia if they're starving in the winter, but then that can happen. So monitor your plants in winter. You don't want to see this kind of thing happen. You got to protect them with, you know, one of these protecting things that I just mentioned. If you start to see damage, and a damaged camellia may just die because, you know, again, we're near the top of their hardiness. If they've got any kind of problem like that, that might be the end of it, in which case you just have to buy another one. Winter protection of camellias. I recommend selecting hardy cultivars so you don't have to protect them. I'm really lazy about protection. Again, all Delaware zone 7, zone 6 is in parts of Pennsylvania. So get one that's right for this zone. But if you plant them late in the year, or you get a very tiny little seedling without a good root ball, you might need to protect it. You can protect all winter or just use as needed in the coldest periods. And the goal is really just to protect in the beginning and then not protect after that. You don't want to do this forever. So again, I don't even protect mine at all, but I'll show you some ways you can do it. I did this with one of those not so hardy gardenias. Just put a little fencing around it, and you can stuff that with leaves or hay, and that will provide just a little bit of protection to the leaves. This you could leave on just about all winter because some light will get through, water will get through. You want to get fancy, there's some items like this shrub coat thing where it actually lets in light and water. It doesn't look like it does, but it does. These are designed mainly to have the snow fall off the plants, not so much for cold, but you do get about half a zone of hardiness with that if you want to use one of these. These cloche things that look like clear plastic umbrellas, these are not really going to work too well for a camellia because they're going to hold too much heat. If the sun hits that, you're going to fry your camellia. But for like 1 or 2 super cold nights, if you wanted to just plunk that over a brand new little camellia, you could do that. It would keep it a little warmer. I just wouldn't leave it on for days and days, especially you don't want the sun to hit that because it'll just roast inside there. It's something for like a very temporary situation. And here's my whole garbage can technique. Super temporary. Obviously, it's getting no light in there, but for that 0 degree night or the -5 degree night, and you just planted your camellia, you could put it under a garbage can with a brick on top. That'll protect it for those super cold nights, but of course it can't stay on very long. You're going to have to take that off after a day or so. Let's look at some sources for camellias. In Newcastle County, we have some of our big independent nurseries. They're kind of the best places to look for a camellia. You might see one at a big box store, you might not, but these independent nurseries are kind of the best place to look. The University of Delaware Botanical Garden Plant Sale sometimes has a few camellias, another source. There's some regional sources. Pepper's Greenhouses down in Milton, they've got lots of camellias and nice choices. They even have a website for mail order if you can't make it down there. If you haven't been to Pepper's, I highly recommend it. They've got a great selection. Rare Find Nursery in Jackson, New Jersey. That's about an hour north of Wilmington on the New Jersey Turnpike. They've got a great selection of all kinds of interesting shrubs, including hardy camellias. Well worth a trip. They're not open every day, though. You have to check their website or call them to see what days they allow people to come. Otherwise, they have a website. Triple Oaks Nursery in South Jersey. My friend there has quite a nice selection of camellias every spring, and he gets them in nice big pots, so they have great root systems. Just plunk them in the ground. He's about an hour from the Commodore Barry Bridge. There's some mail order sources. Camellia Forest is one of the big growers of camellias. A lot of the ones you find up here are actually from there. But you can go to their website and order a lot of these hard to find ones there, or you can go there in person. They have a nice little nursery. Again, Rare Find is a great mail order source if you can't make it there in person. Also check out eBay or Google the name of the cultivar, and you might find, all kinds of nurseries sell camellias mail order, so you might find what you're looking for that way. So now we know the three big factors for success with camellias are hardiness, pick the right variety for your zone, getting the light right, the right amount of sun versus shade, and avoid that winter sun. And soil, amend your soil with pine soil conditioner, especially if you have heavy clay, but even if you don't, it doesn't hurt. They will love it. They will grow very well if you get their roots in 50% pine soil conditioner, 50% native soil, and make sure the location is well drained. And remember, hardy cultivars tend to have names like winter, spring, April, frost, ice, snow, things like that. And also Kumasaka, Korean fire, Long Island pink, and red jade are also extra hardy cultivars. And these are all in your handout, so you should be able to have that for your reference. So quickie quiz, I wonder what did this? What did this to my camellia here? Look at those awful stems with no leaves on them. So I'm in North Wilmington. I didn't think I have deer, but those are chewed up awfully high and right to the bone there. What did that? Well, I think it was squirrels. It was squirrels. They built a nest out of my camellia. I was really mad about that. That is one expensive nest. So it did happen. It's never happened again. So I wouldn't get paranoid that squirrels are going to do this to you. Squirrels will do anything. This took the cake. They chomped up my camellia and made a house out of it. But they left all the others alone. They haven't done it since. So don't worry about that. But it bloomed anyway. So we have a few native camellia relatives in North America. You could try if you'd prefer to have a native plant. As soon as the mailman leaves and the dog stops barking, I will skip. All right, good. Oh, she hates the mailman. All right, so let's look at this. A lot of you have probably heard of the Franklinia. It's a relative, it's a not too distant relative of the camellia. This is a weird native plant that was found in Georgia in the 1700s, and it's never been found again. A few specimens were found. Okay, a lot of you may have heard of the Franklinia. It was named after Ben Franklin. John Bartram, the botanist, went to Georgia in the 1700s, found this beautiful flowering plant, brought it back to Philadelphia, and then none have ever been found in the wild again. It's a tricky plant to grow, which may have something to do with why it's extinct in the wild. It's a very easy plant to kill, but it has beautiful camellia-like flowers. It blooms in the late summer. It's frequently for sale in this area because it has that Philadelphia connection, not because it's easy to grow. But it's a challenge if any of you like challenges. One place to see these growing, of course, is Bartram's Garden in Philadelphia. You can also see them at Longwood Gardens. It supposedly needs good drainage and southern exposure to do well. So not an easy plant. Now there's a hybrid between the Franklinia and a plant called the loblolly bay, which may be a little easier to grow because the Franklinia is hardy but fussy, whereas the loblolly bay is not hardy but not fussy. So putting them together, you get something that's very much like a Franklinia, and it's semi-evergreen, probably hardy, definitely hardy enough to grow in Delaware. This is what it looks like. These are for sale at the University of Delaware Botanical Garden sale. And you can also find these at some nurseries now. And people are hoping this would be an easier version of the Franklinia because it's got the Gordonia genes in it that are not as fussy. Gordonia grows in the swamplands of the South. So it will not grow here. It's a zone 8 plant, but combined with the Franklinia, it will grow in Delaware. There's a couple plants called Stewardias that are a camellia relative also, and you can see they have a flower that kind of reminds you of a camellia. The Stewardia is from the southeastern U.S. This one in particular is from the coastal plain. This one grows well in part shade. It blooms in June. The picture on the left I took at Mount Cuba Observatory in Newcastle, Delaware. Very beautiful plant. It can grow either as a narrow plant or a wide, as the picture shows there. Not going to be easy to find, but a really neat plant. There's another one here called the Mountain Stewardia. It grows higher up in the Appalachians. It is a bit hardier. It's more of a zone 5 plant. Also very pretty, also camellia-like. Don't have much experience with this one. I imagine somebody's got one around the area here, but I haven't seen it yet. So let's move on to bonus section number 2, the not so hardy gardenias. Probably some of you have tried these and not succeeded, and maybe a few of you in Southern Delaware have had luck with them. I haven't. There are many new hardy gardenia cultivars that have been released recently, and they include names like Frostproof, Crown Jewel, Climbs Hardy, Chuck Hayes, Griff Select. Most are rated for zone 6 or 7, but I think they've had disappointing results in the mid-Atlantic. Few have survived more than a few winters. And I think our winters are just too cold for too long. And I think what they're doing is they're testing them in places like North Carolina, where they occasionally get a really low temperature, but it's otherwise not cold. I think our winters just beat them up too much. Here's what some of them look like. Chuck Hayes looks very much like a traditional camellia. Frostproof is also a complex flower, as is Crown Jewel. And then Climbs Hardy is a sort of a daisy-like flower, closer to the original wild plant. I'm sad to say I've tried all these and have not succeeded. I did try this Griff Select. It appeared to be the hardiest. Mine grew to over 4 feet high and wide. There it is in front of my house. I thought I finally found, the hardy camellia that we can grow here in northern Delaware. And then we had those bad winters, those polar vortex winters, and it looked like this. So I didn't really wait to see if it would bounce back. That seemed like kind of pretty dead to me. So I kind of lost faith even in this hardiest one. So some of you may have had luck with these in lower Delaware. I have a friend outside of Rehoboth that has one of the hardy ones, I think Frostproof, doing fine in his garden. It is half a zone warmer there. You might have more luck with them. I remember a few years ago, people were boasting they even had regular non-hardy camellias in Lewis, but that was before these bad winters. I'm not sure what happened after that. So my conclusions are they aren't that hardy. The ratings were based on single cold events, but that took place in the South, where the winter temperatures are higher and the duration of freezing is shorter. This is an example of how the hardiness zones don't tell us everything, because the hardiness zones don't tell us how long the cold lasts or how frequent. And I think our winters are just too cold for too long, but maybe you can get away with them in 7B areas. And that's the end. Any questions on these bonus sections or any other questions on the first part?
Ron, can you bring in a hardy gardenia?
Yes, you can.
Is it too dry inside?
Yes. Yes and yes. If you want to grow one of these, you've got to have that cool greenhouse. Now, I have a little greenhouse shed I built in my yard that I keep it. The heat comes on at 40 degrees, and I can grow anything I want in there through the winter. Gardenias do just great, because at the low heat, the humidity is high. It's got natural light coming in. It's a perfect situation. But try to do that in your house with your dry, typical indoor house heat. It's not going to work. Gardenias are really tough indoor plants. I mean, some people may have had luck. If you have a cool room, you want to put it in the coolest room in your house with the heat shut off, with good light, bright light, sunshine, but cool temperatures, you might get away with it. But otherwise, they're hard plants to overwinter.
I don't see any more questions in the chat area. but a lot of feedback, positive.
Okay. All right, well, thanks everyone.